Dinkas claim to be the direct descendants of the ancient Kemites, who were the great Egyptian pharaohs who built the pyramids. For unknown reason, they too had lost their great Egyptian heritage and civilization and to become what they became today, a nomadic people with no written language, no great heritage, no religion of their own, no culture, but a backward and primitive African people. Some of them still very primitive and run naked in the jungle. It seemed that every African group wants to disassociate itself from its African roots and claim connection with some ancient civilization. The Dinkas are not different in their claim from the African Americans who also claim to be the true black Hebrew Israelites. Likewise, the black Arabs of North Sudan claim to be the direct descendants of the Middle Eastern Arabs. I know that the phrase black Arab is an oxymoron because no human being can be black and Arab at the same time. The Arab person is either white or reddish of a Semitic descent while the black man is black and Hamitic. I think the cause of this irrational denial of someone's origin has something deeper than just their roots being backward and primitive. I believe it has something to do with the color and the looks. Many European tribes, especially the Germanic tribes, were backward and known as barbarians. Some were observed to killing and eating Roman soldiers unlucky enough to be their captives. Some would go to war bare naked with just sandals on their feet and a sword in hand. Some were vandals and behaved like jungle people. Old Spain was named after them, Andalusia. Even the English verb vandalize in the vernacular is used to describe the act of a person who behaves like them. For a long period of time, many of those European tribes remained uncivilized and primitive barbarians until Christianity domesticated them and gave them religion and morals to live by. Nevertheless, no one among their descendants today disowned their roots, like the Germans, Norwegians, Hungarians, Swedes, Franks, English, Berbers, Turks, etc. Michael could not comprehend the enmity and hatred between those two warring tribes of the Dinka and Nuer. Why did they hate each other? Why did they enjoy torturing and murdering one another? How and when the feud between them started, and could it be brought to a peaceful conclusion? Those questions could not be answered even by the most educated members of those two tribes. The roots of the conflict between them go back to hundreds of years. The Dinkas are the biggest tribe in South Sudan, followed by the Nuer and Shilluk. South Sudan is home to around 60 indigenous ethnic groups and 80 linguistic partitions among a 2011 population of around 11 million. Each group or tribe is ruled by a head called the chief or the sultan. None of the tribes are agreeable to being ruled by someone from another tribe. This, in a nutshell, is the problem of the whole continent of Africa. It was converted overnight from a tribal system to that of sovereign countries. This Western imposition has caused numerous conflicts in South Sudan for a people not ready for such change. The Dinkas are determined to rule other tribes by hook or crook. Their argument is hinged on the fact that they have a numerical majority and among the most powerful tribes. The Nuers revolted against them, and this led to a bloody civil war between the two tribes. It is no surprise that the newly minted state of the Democratic Republic of South Sudan collapsed in less than a year. With that collapse, all the big promises and hopes died. The promise to make South Sudan a secular and democratic country where all people would be treated equally regardless of their gender, religion, and ethnic background was just a distant pipe dream. The hundreds of years-old tribal strife and conflict erupted as soon as the African South achieved independence from the Arab North and was decreed an independent African entity by the United Nations in July 9, 2011. According to the Human Rights Watch's report on the atrocities observed in the world's youngest country since President Salva Kiir, a Dinka, accused his Nuerian vice president, Riek Machar, of plotting a coup in December 2013, catalogues crimes ranging from the ethnically motivated murder of civilians to gang rapes and the mass destruction and looting of civilian property. Such acts, it says, have defined the conflict, which is estimated to have killed tens of thousands of people, driven 1.5 million South Sudanese from their homes and left almost 5 million in dire need of humanitarian assistance. South Sudan's death toll in this new war is unknown, but thousands of civilians have been killed, homes and markets burned, and bodies left to be eaten by birds and dogs, says the report of Human Rights Watch. Both sides in South Sudan's recent civil war have committed extraordinary acts of cruelty that amount to war crimes, and potentially, crimes against humanity, according to the report. The American couple found themselves being caught up in a conflict that they did not understand. When the Nuers massacred the Dinkas, they looked at them as ruthless people, and when the Dinkas flogged to death those surrendered Nuer soldiers, they viewed them as heartless people. In both cases, the two groups showed the sinful states of the unrepentant bereft of human hearts. There was no significant difference between the Muslims who tortured and murdered in the name of their religion and those South Sudanese Christians who also tortured and murdered in the name of their tribes. Both groups are deadly tools in the hands of despotic rulers of the world, who are deadly tools in the hand of the devil, John 14:30. They are both enslaved by Satan. The Bible said about both of them, their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths. And the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes, Romans 3:15-17. Christina refused to go with the heartless Dinkas. She fell to the ground, announcing to her husband that even if they had to torture her to death, she would not go with them. Michael tried to convince her that they had no choice except to obey their orders and go with them, but he couldn't. Two of the Dinka soldiers came and literally dragged her up to their military vehicle. Michael attempted to stop them from abusing his wife, but his protests were met with combat boots which silenced him and pushed him back. When he fell to the ground, he too was dragged by his feet and flung into their truck. The Dinkas abused and ill-treated them worse than the relatively mild Nuers. For 6 hours' trip, they were given neither water nor food. They weren't engaged in any conversation. Upon their arrival in the capital city of Juba, the American couple were treated as enemies and imprisoned along with other Nuers. The holding facility was a huge garage, housing military vehicles. There had to be at least 250 prisoners there, with women, children, and old men among their number. The majority were young men. The Dinkas did not care to separate women from men, or children from adults. If the young Nuer women escaped rape from their captors, they could not escape being raped by the Nuer men who were imprisoned with them in the same place. Michael anticipated that many of the young girls were going to be raped at night by the men. Even female children were at risk. He worried constantly about the safety of his wife. How could he protect her from those men, if they came to rape her at night? He found himself in a hopeless situation, worse off than when he was in the Jungle People's Camp. Christina shared the same fears and worries, fully expecting to be viciously attacked and brutally raped at night. She knew that her husband would be outnumbered and possibly killed if he tried to intervene any advances. Since her arrival, the Nuer men were staring at her as hungry beasts that spotted a defenseless prey and paced around for the right time to attack her. The hapless American couple understood that they could do nothing in their hopeless situation except to pray and trust in God for a miraculous salvation. It was around 4 p.m. when Michael and Christina were thrown inside the holding facility. They had gone without food and water for the last 8 hours. It appeared that no one inside the garage had received any food or medical care of any sort. Some of the detainees were badly wounded and their bodies were swollen and bleeding. Children were surviving on the milk that they were suckling from the emaciated bodies of their hungry and thirsty mothers. When the sun went down, the garage turned into a huge dark tomb. There were no lights. The single door and 3 windows of the garage were shut securely. The women and children began to weep. The women were crying from the fear of being raped and the children from everything else. Voices of crying old men could be heard over the wails. The miserable situation of the prisoners would be impossible to describe in human terms. Michael embraced the body of his beloved and enveloped her like a hen trying to protect her brood from eagles overhead. His ears pricked when he heard the shouting of young girls calling for help. Michael knew why those young girls were screaming. He could do nothing to rescue them from their rapists. He just wanted to protect his wife from any possible attack. He anticipated that, sooner or later, one or more men would come groping in the dark to attack his wife. Christina began to scream too. Before he could determine why she was screaming, he heard a loud sound outside the garage. Light filtered in from the 3 windows being opened, and 3 snipers began to open fire on the crowd, killing them indiscriminately. The crowded garage became a killing field. People ran helter-skelter and trampled each other. Everyone was screaming, children, women, and men. The dark garage was pierced by the powder trails of the unceasing shots of the 3 snipers. Michael and Christina happened to be sitting at the other end of the garage. Many of the prisoners took cover in the same section of the garage. The mass of women and men crowding the corner made all movement impossible for the couple. There were people stacked atop others in absolute panic. The firing was directed toward the corner, where the mass of people were concentrated. The couple could hear the shouts of people as the bullets struck home. The smell of cordite lingered in the air, laced with the game scent of blood and sprayed bodily fluids. They just waited for the bullets to relieve them of their agony. They had never longed so much for death as at those difficult moments. The more the coming of their death was prolonged, the more they felt miserable. Both of them began to cry along with the diminishing number of survivors. While the snipers were firing, the big door of the garage opened and Dinka soldiers and policemen rushed in and began to open fire. Those new shooters concentrated their fire on the corner. Michael and Christina were buried underneath tens of bodies of dead and still living newer men and women. The crowded and frightened prisoners put so much pressure on that corner until the corrugated zinc-made wall collapsed outwards. It was as if the angel of God descended from heavens and opened the gate of the bottomless pit. People started to flee immediately for their lives, while the bullets were trailing them like deer fleeing from their hunters. Michael had a death grip on his wife and dragged her when she could not keep up. They just ran along with the others into the street and continued to run aimlessly. Many fell along the way, but they could not even afford a backward glance. The background bark of the machine guns kept them running to the point where they could not run anymore. They fell on their knees and prostrated in a dark alley. A few survivors passed them by and continued to flee for their lives. Only stray dogs continued hounding them with their incessant barking. There were no other people in sight.